Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome back to Sci-Fi Stories. Before we begin our journey today, I want to share with you that YouTube has unfortunately completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with zero budget to keep operating. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1, so our channel has the funds to pay our hardworking staff for their living expenses, allowing them to continue creating these incredible tales for you. You can support us by scanning the QR code on your screen right now, or by clicking the donation link in the description or the pinned comment below. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts. And now, let us dive into the story. The Psi-Corps Alliance Galactic Council Chamber was an architectural marvel, explicitly designed to intimidate. Suspended in the grinding, chaotic void of a dense asteroid belt, the station was formed entirely of a fractal crystalline lattice. Inside this majestic hall, the artificial gravity was carefully calibrated, not for the comfort of its guests, but as a silent weapon of oppression. The atmospheric pressure and gravitational pull were tuned to exactly 1.4 times the standard planetary mass. A subtle, yet punishing weight engineered to make physically inferior species slouch, sweat, and ultimately submit before the diplomatic proceedings even began. The light refracting through the crystal walls was intentionally polarized to induce mild disorientation in species lacking advanced ocular filtering. Through the grand, shimmering plasma doors stumbled Francisco Busby, Earth's chief diplomatic representative. Amidst a sea of radiant robes, bioluminescent armor, and floating anti-gravity thrones, the human diplomat was an absurd sight. He wore a heavily patched tweed suit that looked at least 50 years out of date, carrying a battered leather briefcase under one arm. Almost immediately, he began to tug at his stiff collar, coughing dryly into a crumpled cotton handkerchief. He muttered loudly to himself, completely ignoring the solemnity of the chamber, complaining about how the ambient atmospheric scrubbers were absolutely murdering his sinuses and drying out his throat. Walking, just a half step behind him, was Lyra, his 25-year-old mechanical engineer and acting bodyguard. While other lesser species would typically cower or gaze in awe at the towering architectures of solid light and the multi-limbed delegates leering from their elevated podiums, Lyra did neither. She did not even bother to look up. Instead, she remained utterly silent, her attention entirely consumed by a heavy tungsten Rubik's Cube. Her calloused, grease-stained fingers twisted and snapped the metal joints into place with a rhythmic, rapid precision. The sharp metallic clacks echoing softly in the vast room. Looming above the center of the chamber, encased in a massive, cylindrical tank of bubbling quantum fluid, was Grand Magistrate Xylock. Xylock was a gelatinous, jellyfish-like entity whose sprawling, translucent nervous system pulsed with an arrogant, toxic violet hue. He peered down at the two humans with naked, unadulterated disgust. "Behold, the representatives of Sector 7. Xylock's voice echoed directly into the minds of the assembled alien audience, though a hovering translation drone hastily vocalized it into English for the human delegation. "Evolutionarily defective meat. They are completely blind to the psionic spectrum. They stumble through the cosmos like deaf insects, entirely ignorant of the higher symphonies of the universe." Francisco adjusted his round wire-rimmed spectacles, blinking owlishly up at the giant floating jellyfish. "I am terribly sorry to interrupt, Your Honor, but could we perhaps get a glass of water down here? The humidity must be hovering around 12%. It is terribly abrasive to the vocal cords." A ripple of psychic sneers spread through the alien delegates. Disgusted by the mundane interruption, Xylock pulsed his central ganglia, deciding to teach these ignorant primates a lesson in hierarchy. He covertly engaged the chamber's subsonic pacification matrix. It was a highly illegal, yet widely practiced interrogation tactic used by the Council on primitive species. invisible. Low-frequency acoustic waves flooded the floor, designed to violently vibrate the inner ear fluid and resonate within the skull cavities of lesser beings. It was intended to induce crippling migraines, sudden vertigo, and an overwhelming biological urge to fall to their knees in agonizing submission. The concentrated acoustic waves slammed into the two humans. Francisco merely sneezed, wiped his nose with his handkerchief, and pulled out an analog pocket watch to check the time. Beside him, Lyra did not miss a single rotation of her metal puzzle. Her heart rate, actively monitored by the station's intrusive biometrics, remained completely flat at a resting 60 beats per minute. The subsonic weapon, capable of dropping a fully armored Krellian warrior to the floor in blinding agony, barely registered against the incredibly dense bone structure and aggressive vestibular systems of a species born and bred on a high-gravity death world. The quantum fluid in Xylok's tank began to boil furiously as his violet tendrils whipped against the reinforced glass in suppressed rage. He was infuriated by their sheer insensibility. If these defective apes were too neurologically blunt to feel the subtle lash of his authority, they would have to be broken through more direct, physical means. Your total lack of basic sensory perception is a liability to the Alliance, Xylok boomed, abruptly, cutting off the useless acoustic assault. Before Earth can be granted even probationary status, you must prove your biological resilience. I declare that Earth must pass the neural assimilation rite. A collective psychic gasp rippled through the Council. On paper, the rite was presented to outsiders as a grueling physical endurance test. In reality, it was a brutal, anonymous subjugation protocol designed to forcibly implant a permanent, psionic subservience code directly into the cerebral cortex of any newly joining species, guaranteeing their eternal obedience to the Council. The center of the crystalline floor groaned, emitting a deep, resonant hum that vibrated violently through the soles of Francisco's scuffed leather shoes. The flawless, light-refracting lattice split perfectly down the middle, retreating into the bulkheads with a heavy, grinding finality to allow a massive hexagonal platform to rise from the lightless depths of the station's underbelly. Thick, choking plumes of cryogenic vapor spilled over the platform's edges, chilling the air and creeping like icy tendrils toward the Earth delegation. From the freezing mist stepped a living, breathing nightmare of engineered biology. This was Kael'thul. He towered at nearly 4 meters in height, a colossal mountain of hyperdense muscle and grafted cybernetics that made the surrounding, heavily armed alien guards look like fragile, hollow toys. Every inch of his hulking, imposing physique was plated in overlapping, molecularly bonded titanium scales, shifting and grinding against one another with the sickening sound of metal chewing relentlessly on bone. But the most horrifying aspect of Kael'thul was not his impregnable armor or his immense, suffocating size that seemed to devour the light around him. It was what lay completely bare beneath the plating. Down the entire length of his spine, stretching across his massive pectoral plates, and weaving intricately through his thick neck was a fully exposed, artificially hypertrophied nervous system. These bulging neural pathways pulsed with a sickly, luminescent violet energy, beating in time with a slow, thundering heart that echoed menacingly through the suddenly silent chamber. Witness the absolute pinnacle of physiological pacification. A multi-eyed delegate hissed from a floating podium, its voice translated into a grating, metallic screech that tore through the quiet room. Kael'thul is not a mere brawler designed for crude, kinetic violence. He is a perfectly calibrated, living bioelectromagnetic weapon. His engineered neural pathways generate a psionic pulse so devastating, so overwhelmingly potent, that a single, grazing touch will instantly incinerate the cognitive faculties and utterly break the sovereign will of any lesser organism. The sheer visual disparity in scale between the two combatants was completely absurd. Standing just a few meters away, Lyra looked impossibly fragile, her slender frame utterly dwarfed by the towering biological weapon whose shadow now entirely engulfed her. A sinister, silent amusement rippled through the upper tiers of the council chamber. The alien representatives did not even bother to hide their sneers of absolute superiority, unseen by human eyes. A flurry of rapid, vicious telepathic wagers shot back and forth across the station's psychic network. They eagerly bet on the exact, gruesome nature of the human girl's impending psychological destruction. Some wagered highly prized star systems that she would suffer permanent, irreversible amnesia within 3 seconds of physical contact. Others gleefully bet that her primitive cerebral cortex would simply boil inside her fragile skull, leaving her violently seizing and foaming at the mouth before her knees even touched the cold crystal floor. In the face of this overwhelming, suffocating display of absolute alien supremacy, Francisco Busby simply pushed his wire-rimmed glasses higher up the bridge of his nose. He reached into his rumpled tweed jacket, pulling out a battered, leather-bound notebook and a cheap plastic ballpoint pen. He clicked the pen exactly 1 time. "Excuse me," Francisco called out, his voice mild, conversational, and completely devoid of even a trace of fear, piercing the heavy, tense atmosphere of the room. "Just a quick clerical question for the official diplomatic records. Does Mr. Kelthul possess a comprehensive life insurance policy registered within his home star system?" For a long, agonizing moment, the Grand Chamber was dead silent. Then it erupted. A deafening chorus of clicking mandibles, psychic howling, and deep, guttural roaring filled the air as the assembled council laughed in sheer, unadulterated contempt. The question was so incredibly pathetic, so painfully entrenched in meaningless bureaucracy, that they viewed it as the ultimate, undeniable manifestation of human ignorance. To ask about a financial life insurance policy for an immortal, perfectly engineered god of subjugation was a joke entirely beyond their comprehension. They laughed bitterly at the weak, oblivious little man who could not even begin to fathom the divine violence about to be unleashed upon his helpless subordinate, while the council basked in their cruel, mocking amusement. Lyra finally stopped her repetitive movements. The sharp, rhythmic clacking of the tungsten puzzle instantly ceased. She calmly slid the heavy metal cube into the deep canvas pocket of her heavy work coveralls. With deliberate, incredibly slow motions, she grabbed the cuffs of her thick mechanical gloves and tugged them off her hands, tossing them carelessly onto the flawless crystal floor. She stood directly in the suffocating shadow of the 4-meter giant, slowly closing her eyes. She did not brace her legs for a kinetic impact. She did not raise her bare hands to adopt a defensive combat stance. Instead, she breathed out, a long, incredibly slow exhalation that seemed to drain every single ounce of tension from her posture. Deep within the core of her chest, she consciously seized absolute control of her autonomic nervous system. Her heartbeat slowed, dropping down, plummeting further than any normal biological metric should ever physically allow. High up on the council's command console, the intrusive biometric scanners that were locked onto the human delegation began to violently flash red. The multi-limbed alien technicians tapped their glowing consoles in absolute confusion. According to the highly advanced sensors monitoring the chamber, the small human female's pulse had plummeted so drastically, and her core internal temperature had stabilized so perfectly with the ambient room, that the diagnostic screens displayed a critical, system-wide fatal error message. The harsh words flashed in bright, unforgiving alien script across the primary viewing screens. No life signs found. The Titan took his first step. The kinetic impact of his massive foot striking the crystalline floor instantly overpowered the localized anti-gravity dampeners. A deep, seismic shudder rippled through the entire chamber. With every subsequent stride, the artificial gravity grid violently stuttered, struggling and failing to compensate for his impossible density. From the exposed, bulging biological cables wrapping around his colossal forearms, violent sparks of violet electricity violently arced into the cold air. These were not mere visual effects. They were raw, bleeding discharges of neural energy from his peripheral nervous system, snapping and hissing like miniature lightning storms seeking ground. "Administer the touch of peace," Xylok commanded from his elevated fluid tank. The phrase was a grotesque, sanitized euphemism broadcasted across the chamber. It was the official execution order. The alien delegates leaned forward, their multifaceted eyes wide with sadistic anticipation, fully aware that this peace was actually a localized cognitive supernova. It was a concentrated blast of telepathic radiation specifically calibrated to flood the target's cerebral cortex, liquefy their sovereign will, and forcibly rewrite their neural architecture into eternal subservience. Down on the floor, Francisco Busby did not shout. He did not attempt to draw a weapon or shield his subordinate. Instead, his eyes darted behind his wire-rimmed spectacles, calculating a precise geometric angle. He took exactly 3 paces backward. The sharp, rhythmic clicks of his leather shoes seemed incredibly loud against the backdrop of the giant's thundering approach. Reaching into his worn leather briefcase, Francisco smoothly withdrew a perfectly ordinary black folding umbrella. With a swift, practiced flick of his wrist, he deployed it right in the middle of the solemn diplomatic hall. The heavy nylon canopy snapped open with a dull thud. He rested the handle casually on his shoulder, completely unfazed, shielding himself from an entirely invisible rain. Up in the floating galleries, a wave of profound bewilderment washed over the alien representatives. To them, the human diplomat's nonsensical deployment of a rudimentary weather-shielding device in the face of a divine execution was the ultimate proof of his species' complete mental degradation. Then, time itself seemed to warp and stretch, dragging out every agonizing microsecond under the immense, crushing pressure of the impending contact. Kyle Thule raised his monstrous right arm. The descent of his colossal hand became a glacier of impending doom. The air around the descending appendage began to visually distort, rippling with the sheer density of the concentrated electromagnetic charge. Every single fiber of muscle in Kyle Thule's arm could be seen contracting and releasing in hyperdetail, driving the heavy limb downward. Dust motes, suspended in the air, were violently repelled by the static field, scattering like panicked insects. 5 razor-sharp claws, each one the size of a human rib bone, slowly parted the ionized air. Down they came, moving millimeter by agonizing millimeter. The crushing shadow of his palm expanded, eclipsing Lyra entirely. She stood perfectly still, a fragile porcelain figure trapped beneath an industrial hydraulic press. Her eyelashes did not even flutter. Her breathing remained at an absolute, imperceptible standstill. The terrifying contrast between the unstoppable, world-ending force of the biological weapon and the absolute, terrifying stillness of the human engineer created a vacuum of suspense that threatened to suffocate the entire room. The colossal hand finally settled, its immense span completely enveloping her delicate left shoulder and wrapping securely around the vulnerable nape of her neck. Contact was made. The very microsecond the cold, metallic tips of Kyle Thule's claws brushed against the soft, bare skin of Lyra's neck. The devastating payload detonated. A torrential flood of raw, unadulterated psionic energy surged from the giant's hypertrophied nervous system. It bypassed all physical barriers, pumping directly into her central nerve trunk. The sheer, overwhelming volume of the telepathic invasion tore through the boundaries of the physical realm, manifesting instantly as a horrifying, high-pitched acoustic shriek that shattered the heavy silence of the station. Several delegates physically recoiled, clutching their auditory receptors in sudden agony as the psychic feedback looped violently through the air. It was designed to be a total, instantaneous cognitive wipe. But the invading energy hit an evolutionary brick wall. The biology of a creature forged in the relentless, hyper-lethal crucible of the Deathworld, known as Earth, did not possess the sophisticated, delicate receptors required to process this foreign invasion as a form of higher communication. It did not recognize the complex psionic subjugation code. Instead, the raw, unfiltered data slammed into the most ancient, primitive structures of her brainstem. Her survival-driven nervous system categorized the massive influx of alien energy in the most fundamental, aggressive way possible. It did not register as a diplomatic message. It registered as a highly concentrated, hostile biological agent. It was instantly classified by her physiology as a direct, lethal weapon threatening her immediate physical existence. The instant the invisible psychic invasion breached the critical pain threshold of her central nervous system, Lyra's conscious mind was entirely bypassed. There was absolutely no thought, no cognitive decision to fight back, and no conscious processing of the imminent threat. In a span of time, measuring less than 0.05 seconds, her sympathetic nervous system hijacked her entire physiological structure. This was the ultimate, deeply ingrained survival mechanism of a Deathworld predator, violently waking up to defend its existence. The colossal wave of telepathic energy surging into her skull met an absolute evolutionary anomaly. Instead of absorbing the psychic payload, the incredibly dense architecture of the human brain functioned as a flawless, impenetrable biological mirror. The overwhelming telepathic energy was instantaneously reflected back through the physical point of contact via a brutal mechanism of quantum physical feedback. The immediate, devastating reversal of energy perfectly obeyed the biological mutation equation of her nervous system. In this inescapable mathematical reality, the sheer volume of the giant's own raw psionic power, violently divided by the near-zero fraction of time it took for the human reflex to trigger, generated an exponential rebound spike. This catastrophic backfire slammed directly into Thul's exposed neural pathways. The towering biological weapon suffered immediate, massive neural anaphylactic shock. Every single engineered muscle fiber in his gargantuan body locked into absolute, rigid paralysis in a fraction of a heartbeat, while the giant was momentarily frozen by his own rebounding energy. Lyra moved. She did not throw a chaotic punch or lash out in panic. She executed an act of pure, devastating geometry. Her body pivoted seamlessly on the ball of her right foot, rotating a mathematically perfect 180 degrees, instead of uselessly resisting the crushing downward force of Thul's massive, armored arm. Her nervous system ruthlessly calculated the physical vector and hijacked his immense momentum. She ducked slightly beneath his grip, transferring the kinetic energy from her firmly planted feet through the rapid rotation of her hips, and turning her entire skeletal frame into a flawless, unstoppable physical lever. She weaponized the giant's own incredible mass and downward trajectory completely against him. With her rotation complete and her kinetic chain maximizing the centrifugal force, Lyra's small right hand snapped upward. Her fingers were curled back tightly, exposing the dense, hardened bone of her palm's heel, forming a perfect biological wedge. Her strike bypassed the impenetrable, overlapping titanium scales, protecting his vast chest and heavily armored throat. Driven by an unconscious, brutal precision, her hand shot in a flawless upward trajectory, targeting the singular structural weak point in Thul's fearsome anatomy. Her palm slammed directly into the unprotected, microscopic gap located exactly at the juncture where his thick, reinforced skull connected to his uppermost titanium cervical vertebra. There was no booming explosion or theatrical roar of defeat. There was only a crisp, sickeningly sharp cracking sound. It was an incredibly dry, brittle noise, yet the highly sophisticated acoustic amplification matrix of the Grand Council chamber broadcasted the gruesome frequency, with terrifying clarity, to every quiet corner of the room. That single, focused impact carried enough concentrated kinetic force to shatter the heavy titanium vertebra completely. The catastrophic structural failure instantly severed the giant's glowing violet spinal cord, permanently and violently disconnecting his highly advanced brain from the rest of his colossal muscular framework. The invincible, towering god of subjugation crumpled. Without the structural tension of his commanding nervous system, Kael'thul's massive 4-meter body collapsed inward like a violently demolished skyscraper. He crashed into the crystalline floor with a deafening, earth-shaking thud that sent violent tremors racing up the pristine walls. The sheer impact shattered the glowing floor panels beneath his dead weight, standing over the fallen behemoth. Lyra blinked rapidly. Her rigid, combative posture dissolved instantly, and she let out a long, heavy exhalation. Her dark eyes darted around the massive chamber with a vacant, utterly bewildered expression, resembling a confused pedestrian who had just been abruptly startled awake from a very deep, dreamless sleep. A few meters away, a pressurized jet of glowing, highly toxic violet spinal fluid erupted from Kael'thul's shattered neck, arcing directly toward the human diplomat. The corrosive spray splattered harmlessly against the tightly stretched nylon canopy of Francisco Busby's open black umbrella. With a perfectly timed, graceful motion, Francisco shook off the glowing alien fluid and neatly folded the umbrella back together, snapping the fastening button shut. He adjusted his heavy tweed jacket, pushed his wire-rimmed spectacles up his nose, and offered a thoroughly polite, genial smile to the stunned, deadly, silent room. An absolute, suffocating silence descended upon the grand chamber, heavier than the artificial gravity itself. It lasted for exactly 3 seconds before the catastrophic psychic backlash hit, because the alien delegates had eagerly linked their minds to the station's telepathic network to savor the anticipated breaking of the human girl. They were fully connected to Kael'thul the exact moment his consciousness was violently snuffed out. A cacophony of horrific screeches shattered the quiet. Across the floating podiums, highly evolved dignitaries began to violently convulse. Several delegates collapsed over their ornate consoles, violently vomiting bioluminescent fluid onto the pristine crystal floors. Others clawed desperately at their own auditory receptors, suffering from instantaneous sensory hemorrhages as the phantom sensation of a shattered spine echoed mercilessly through their shared neural link. Suddenly, the automated security grid engaged. The ambient lighting snapped from a cold, sterile white to a blinding, flashing crimson. The heavy ceiling panels slid apart, and dozens of automated plasma turrets dropped down, their mechanical servos whining sharply. A multitude of targeting lasers instantly converged on Lyra, painting her grease-stained coveralls with lethal red dots. The high-pitched hum of plasma coils charging to maximum capacity filled the air, ready to incinerate the perceived threat. Francisco Busby sighed softly. He walked calmly through the sea of converging targeting lasers, seemingly oblivious to the imminent threat of molecular vaporization. He reached into his tweed pocket and pulled out a small, sterile adhesive bandage. He gently took Lyra's right hand, carefully inspecting a microscopic scratch on her knuckle caused by the jagged edge of a titanium scale, and methodically applied the bandage. Only then did he turn to the nearest diplomatic console, lifting a heavy silver microphone from its stand. He tapped it twice, ensuring the translation matrix was active. "I would strongly advise against allowing those automated defense systems to fire," Francisco announced, his voice smooth and conversational, echoing clearly through the chamber over the wailing sirens. "If even a single plasma bolt strikes my engineer, The resulting kinetic stress will trigger a secondary biological reflex, and every single living entity aboard this station will be instantly reduced to subatomic ash. He set his battered leather briefcase on the console, unlatched it, and smoothly flipped open a thick manila folder. He adjusted his spectacles and looked up at the writhing, groaning aliens. "You have operated under a catastrophic misconception regarding human physiology," Francisco explained, his tone resembling a disappointed university professor addressing a room full of failing students. "You categorized us as psychically blind because your sophisticated scanners could not detect any telepathic emissions from our bodies. That is entirely incorrect. The human brain is not missing a psionic network. Rather, because we evolved on an exceptionally violent, chaotic death world, a sensitive, broadcasting mind would have been driven completely insane by the sheer volume of ambient pain and predatory intent. To survive, the human brain evolved into a dense, inescapable psionic black hole." He tapped a page in his folder to emphasize his point. "We do not lack telepathy. We actively devour it. Our neural pathways are encased in incredibly dense evolutionary shielding. Any external psionic energy directed at a human is immediately absorbed, infinitely compressed, and then violently reflected. What you witnessed just now was not a calculated assassination." Francisco gestured casually toward the massive, lifeless corpse of Kelthul bleeding slowly onto the floor. "My engineer did not make a conscious decision to attack your champion. She experienced a localized, pure spinal reflex. When your biological weapon attempted to force an overwhelming amount of telepathic energy into her confined neural space, he effectively created a critical mass overload. The energy was compressing fiercely against her mental shielding, preparing to violently detonate outward." He leaned closer to the microphone, his voice dropping to a chillingly serious register. "Had she not severed the physical connection by breaking his neck, the resulting psionic explosion would have possessed the raw concussive force of a thermonuclear warhead. It would have vaporized this entire space station and every single fleet anchored within a 10,000-mile radius. Her nervous system simply acted as a biological circuit breaker, pulling the plug on a faulty, overloaded power source before it could explode and kill us all." Inside his bubbling quantum fluid tank, Grand Magistrate Zylok stopped thrashing. His glowing violet tendrils hung limp as the sheer, unadulterated horror of the situation finally penetrated his arrogant mind. The psychic nausea twisting his gelatinous form was entirely eclipsed by a sudden, paralyzing realization of the truth. The illustrious Galactic Council had just gleefully attempted to forcefully implant a standard submission code directly into the core of a highly volatile biological nuclear bomb. They had mocked the humans for being inferior, fragile meat. Yet the small, unassuming girl standing quietly below had just unknowingly saved the lives of every single delegate in the room. And she had done so by effortlessly, unconsciously terminating the ultimate, invincible weapon of the Alliance. The humans were not defective prey. They were an apocalyptic hazard, completely immune to the highest forms of galactic control, and absolutely deadly to the touch. Francisco closed his manila folder with a crisp, authoritative slap that made several of the recovering alien delegates flinch violently. He leaned casually against the diplomatic console, his unassuming posture now projecting an aura of absolute, terrifying control. "To be perfectly candid with the Council," Francisco stated, his voice devoid of any warmth, "I was fully aware of your clandestine neural assimilation right long before my shuttle ever docked with this station. You see, while your species may possess vastly superior bioengineering and psionic capabilities, your bureaucratic accounting practices are frankly atrocious. By simply deciphering the heavily redacted public financial reports of this assembly over the past 3 fiscal years, my team easily tracked the massive, illicit procurement of military-grade telepathic pacification equipment. He adjusted his spectacles, his eyes locking onto the trembling form of Grand Magistrate Xylock, floating in his ruined quantum tank. You systematically weaponized the induction process against every newly discovered civilization to guarantee absolute compliance. It was a blatant, grotesque violation of the fundamental Pan-Galactic Peace Treaty. Knowing this, I intentionally selected Lyra to accompany me today. She is not merely an engineer. She is a veteran of Earth's most brutal resource wars, severely afflicted with combat reflex hyperactivity syndrome, a severe form of post-traumatic stress. I brought her here specifically to act as a biological fuse. A collective gasp of horror echoed across the chamber. The human diplomat had purposefully walked a traumatized, highly reactive biological bomb into the heart of their empire, fully anticipating their treacherous trap. I needed irrefutable proof of your treaty violations, Francisco continued smoothly. And you have generously provided it. Now, the Council faces a rather uncomfortable dilemma. You can either attempt to explain to the wider galactic community how you maliciously orchestrated a psychic assassination against a peaceful diplomatic envoy, only to nearly commit a spectacular mass suicide, or we can resolve this unfortunate misunderstanding right now, quietly and efficiently. Trapped in an impossible, deeply humiliating corner, Xylock's bioluminescent tendrils flashed with the sickly, pale color of total defeat. To admit that their ultimate engineered champion was effortlessly slaughtered by a supposedly inferior primate. And that said, primate had actually saved them from their own catastrophic arrogance, would instantly shatter the Council's authority across 1,000 star systems. With a heavy, trembling mental sigh, the Grand Magistrate activated the emergency voting protocol. A massive holographic display flickered to life above the center of the chamber, casting a stark blue light over the fractured crystal floor. The motion is to grant the Earth delegation immediate, supreme permanent member status on the Galactic Council, Xylock rasped, his telepathic voice completely devoid of its former arrogance. The response was instantaneous. In a span of time measuring less than 1 minute, the voting tallies skyrocketed. Every single one of the shaking, horrified delegates, deeply traumatized by the sheer lethal potential of human physiology, desperately smashed their voting consoles. The final result flashed across the screen with absolute finality. 100% consensus. Not a single delegate dared to oppose. Immediately, the wailing security sirens abruptly cut off. The dozens of automated plasma turrets suspended from the ceiling powered down with a fading hum, retracting safely back into their hidden compartments. High on the main galactic registry board, the official profile for humanity updated in real time. Beneath the designation of Earth, a glaring, bright red warning label materialized for all the galaxy to see. Extreme Deathworld. Absolutely no neural interference. Down on the floor, the heavy silence returned, broken only by a familiar, rhythmic clicking sound. Lyra had calmly knelt down, retrieving her heavy tungsten puzzle from the debris. She wiped a smear of alien fluid off its surface with her thumb and resumed twisting the metal segments. She looked up briefly, her expression mild and apologetic. "I am very sorry for ruining your nice crystal floor," she said softly. The sheer, casual nonchalance of her apology, delivered while standing directly over the massive, shattered corpse of their invincible champion, proved to be too much. 3 alien representatives in the front row let out high-pitched wheezes, their eyes rolling back into their heads as they abruptly fainted, collapsing out of their ornate, anti-gravity chairs in pure shock. Francisco Busby offered a graceful, sweeping bow to the stunned assembly. He neatly buttoned the center button of his worn tweed vest, picked up his leather briefcase, and flashed a thoroughly polite, diplomatic smile up at Xylock. I believe this concludes our incredibly productive session today, Francisco declared warmly. Oh, just one final point of order. Your Honor, could you kindly let my office know exactly which planet will be hosting next week's physical culture exchange? I want to ensure Earth has enough time to send over a few more representatives to properly participate. Thank you all so much for listening to today's story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please, let me know in the comments below. If you found today's tale entertaining, please consider supporting the channel with just $1. Your kindness allows us to pay our dedicated staff so they can feed their families and keep creating even better stories for you. You can easily help us out by scanning the donation QR code right on your screen, or by using the donation link provided in the description and pinned comment. Thank you again, and have a wonderful day.